Hey everybody, tonight we are debating intelligent design versus evolution, and we are starting right now. Ladies and gentlemen, thrilled to have you here for another epic debate. If it's your first time here, consider hitting that subscribe button as we have many more debates here at Modern Day Debate yet to come. Many juicy, controversial debates. For example, at the bottom right of your screen, want to let you know if you have not heard about this, you guys, we are pumped. We will have the debate Is Christianity Dangerous? With Dr. Michael Shermer and Mike Jones from Inspiring Philosophy. That's on January 8th. It's going to be epic, folks, and want to let you know, this is going to be a Kickstarter-funded event. In other words, if you would like to watch it live, it's only $3, the price of a cup of coffee. And so that Kickstarter link is in the description, folks. I'd encourage you, don't let it sneak up on you to where you might miss it live. Quick, click on that Kickstarter link so that you can, just for $3, you can basically sign up. You'll get to watch it live. And one last thing I want to mention about that, as we do our channel housekeeping stuff, is that this event, you might be wondering, well, why are you doing a Kickstarter? Well, basically, this opens up a lot of opportunities for us, guys. You could say it basically helps us bear a lot more risk. In other words, a lot of speakers, for example, Michael Shermer, New York Times bestseller. I mean, a lot of these people have huge opportunities. People are willing to pay them a lot of money to come speak. And so in order for us to help cover those speaker fees to where we can kind of take those bigger risks, well, you could say that many hands make light work when it comes to kind of bearing and spreading the risk so that we can have these guests on for these bigger and more epic debates. And so do want to let you know that Kickstarter link is in the description. Watch it live by making a short and small pledge. Also, channel housekeeping stuff. Folks, I don't know if I've mentioned this. We are on Twitch. If you prefer Twitch over YouTube, hey, we are streaming there live right now. And so if that's your platform you prefer, well, we're over there. Hope it's useful. And we're also on virtually all major podcasts now. So we've gotten emails back from Pandora and iTunes. We're on there as well. Hope that's useful and enjoyable for you, and feel free to rate us at those as well. Also, channel housekeeping stuff. Want to let you know, leading into our debate for tonight, all of our guests' links are in the description. What are you waiting for? If you want to hear more from them, you can hear from them, more from them, after this debate, as they're all linked in the description. And want to let you know, we are going to have a tag team debate where each side is going to have about 15 minutes for their opening. Then we're going to have open conversation and then Q&A for about 30 minutes at the end. So if you happen to have a question, feel free to fire it into the old live chat. If you tag me with @ModernDayDebate, makes it easier for me to get every question in that Q&A list. And then Super Chat, of course, is also an option. It'll bump your question to the top of the list and also give you an opportunity to make a comment toward one of the speakers or an objection that they, of course, would get a chance to respond to. Now, what I'm going to do is give a quick hello, as we're thrilled to have our guests with us. This is going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to go from left to right, as you see on your screen there, folks. First, we're going to say welcome back Erica, who was co-moderating with us last night. That was a fun one, and so glad to have you back, Erica. What can people expect to find at your link? And thanks so much for being here.
Hey, I'm always happy to be on Modern Day Debate, whether I'm debating or modding. You know, I love the channel, love to help out when I can, but it's been a while since I've gotten to come on and debate. So I'm super psyched to be here for that. And I'm very glad that everyone is being patient with my horrible lighting, because I'm at my parents' house and I've got like this ancient lamp, you know, casting shadows upon me as if I'm some kind of like Stephen King monster. But you can check out my channel at Gutsick Gibbon. I generally cover paleontology, primatology, zoology, human evolution, things like that. My background is I have a BSA in animal science, pre-professional, so veterinary stuff was my plan to be, so a lot of, you know, bio there. Picked up a minor in biology as well as a minor in anthropology, and I'm currently finishing up my thesis for a Master of Research in primatology. So that's kind of my background for those of you out there who, I don't know, maybe you're curious, maybe not, but that's my deal.
Thanks so much. Thrilled to have you. And also thrilled to have you back, Dr. Sy Garte. It's been a while. We're glad to have you here. Should be a blast. What can people expect to find your link?
The first thing you'll see if you click on my website is my book, The Works of His Hands, Scientist's Journey from Atheism to Faith, which was published last year, 2019, and is still available and doing pretty well. Also, you can find links to my blog, my YouTube channel, which is called Faithful Science, spelled Syence, and my new podcast channel. So everything is on one website. Yeah, I haven't been on Modern Day Debate for a year and a half, and I stopped debating for a while anywhere, and I'm glad to be back. Thank you, James.
Thank you. And we will kick it over to Maddox. Glad to have you back. John, what can people expect to find at your link?
So awesome to be here yet again. James is always trying to drag me into these debates because he knows that I so much enjoy having mental combat. So my channel is Logical, Plausible, Probable, where I try to showcase things that are just that, logical, plausible, and probable, specifically regarding our existence, what's required for it, and from a macro view, what it means from a big picture and more comprehensive perspective of what's required for our very existence. Great, looking forward to this debate, and hopefully we can provide some entertainment for the audience. And it's pretty entertaining looking at how all of the atheists right now are triggered already, and the debate hasn't even started yet. So I can only imagine what it's going to be like once we get into open discussion. But enough about me. Let's kick it over to the one and only Otangelo, who's even more hated on YouTube than I am.
Thrilled to have you, Otangelo.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's fun to be again at your channel, James. And for who doesn't know me, I have a virtual library. It's called reasonandscience.catsports.com, where I collect information about intelligent design. I have a YouTube channel, Intelligent Design Academy, which is also about intelligent design, and another YouTube channel, which is The God Talk, which is more about having conversations with people of all sorts, with atheists, believers, and so forth.
Thank you very much, Otangelo. And so, very excited to get the ball rolling tonight, as we're going to have the ID side kick it off with their opening, which will be 15 minutes split between John and Otangelo, with Otangelo starting first. Otangelo, the floor is all yours.
Okay. Can everyone see the screen? Can I start?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things that most distinguishes us from primates is the ability to speak. Noam Chomsky, the most influential linguist of the last 50 years, wrote that language evolution and the brain mechanisms underlying it appear to be beyond serious inquiry at the moment. And the science paper from 2018 said the molecular mechanisms underlying hominin brain evolution predating modern humans remain to be elucidated. Humans have a unique anatomy that supports our ability to produce complex language. Human speech and communication depends on an interdependent, integrated, very complex system where at least 9 parts and organ systems play an essential role. 1, consciousness and memory. 2, a language. 3, the entire system and mechanics of human voice production and control. 4, the lungs, which are the source of acoustic energy for speech production. 5, the nervous system, which links various systems to the brain. 6, the brain for several functions. 7, the ability to the expression of emotions through the face and body gesticulation. 8, audition through ears to receive the sounds. 9, muscle actions precisely coordinated by the brain. And the 4 processes used to create speech are breathing, phonation, resonance, and articulation. 1, the idea that matter somehow by evolutionary processes can become conscious is absurd. Hard objects are never observed spontaneously to transform themselves into abstract ideas. 2. Some of our mental abilities and emotional traits are certainly shared to some degree by other species, but language is without any homologue in any other species. Language evolution would have to start with simple grunts and gestures and progressing through more and more complex communication systems until reaching human language. And again, no plausible hypothetical evolutionary series has ever been proposed. Thus, evidence is consistent with a saltational origin. None of the evolutionary just so stories come anywhere close to explaining how man might have acquired the astonishing ability to craft unlimited propositions and concepts and using a system of grammar and abstract words that are non-existent in the animal kingdom. 3. The mechanism for generating the human voice is an interdependent, integrated system. Natural selection would not select for components of a complex system that would be useful only in the completion of that much larger system. 4. The lungs serve as the bellows, providing the source of acoustic energy for speech production. 5. The nervous system links the brain to the mouth, face muscles, ears, lungs, and the vibratory and resonating system. At least 7 nervous systems are employed. 6. Following regions in the brain work together as a network to process words and word sequences to determine context and meaning. Speech demands extraordinarily fine and rapid motor control. Elaborate movements of the larynx, mouth, face, tongue, and breath must be synchronized with cognitive activity. Broca's area contributes to verbal fluency, language production, and the semantic aspects of language. Wernek's area has 3 sub-areas. One responds to spoken words and other sounds. The second to words spoken by someone else. The third with producing speech. The temporal pole is involved in high-level semantic representation and socio-emotional processing. The supramarginal gyrus is involved in phonological and articulatory processing of words. The angular gyrus is more involved in semantic processing. The auditory cortex lets us recognize sounds, an essential prerequisite for understanding language. The posterior terminal portion of the superior temporal sulcus provides access to meaning. And the triangular and orbital portions of the inferior frontal gyrus also play a role in semantic processing. Lastly, a number of researchers now reject classic localist models of language. Instead, they conceptualize language and cognitive functions in general as being distributed across separate areas that process information in parallel, rather than serially from one language area to another. 7. Science lists 27 different kinds of expressions of feelings and emotions. Intelligence, feelings, emotions are intertwined and connected with the human body, which responds to the way we think, feel, and act. 8. Muscle actions in the head, neck, chest, and abdomen are precisely coordinated by the brain. 9. Ears are necessary to hear and to receive the information. These 9 points constitute an irreducible, interdependent, integrated complex system. How could it have evolved in a long evolutionary process? The brains of chimpanzees differ considerably from those of humans. Let's have a look at some numbers. The size of the hominid brain increased from about 450 milliliters at 3.5 million years ago, supposedly, to our current average volume of 1,350 milliliters. And the number of cells in the human brain, about 100 billion neurons. Brain size increases as a function of cell numbers, such that an 11 times larger brain is built with 10 times more neurons. Now let's make a calculation. The human brain has about 100 billion neurons. The hominid brain of our ur-ancestor, 3.5 million years ago, had a brain the size of about 33 billion neurons. That means there was an increase of 67 billion neurons in 3.5 million years. Chimps start breeding at about 10 years of age. That means that there would have been 350,000 generations in 3.5 million years. That means there would have had to be an increase of 200,000 neurons in each generation. So how could evolutionary mechanisms produce the 200,000 new neurons per generation? The task would be to specify each new cell precisely through a master program which coordinates, instructs, and defines each neuron. There are sensory neurons, motor neurons, interneurons, and many other different neurons, but science does not know how many exactly. And now mutation rates are extremely low in humans, about 60 genome-wide per generation. So my end question, could 60 genetic mutations have produced 200,000 new neurons besides the macromorphological change of the entire organism per generation, averaged during 350,000 generations? And with that, I end my presentation.
Maddox is loading up his presentation, folks.
James, are you on mute?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it looks like he might be. James, can you hear us?
Oh.
James.
Okay. Sorry about that. The two mute buttons. But the floor is all yours, John.
All right, so here in just a second, James, I'm going to need to share my screen. But before I do that, you know, a lot of the things that always get brought up in these debates of, you know, oh, there's enough time, could it happen, do we see examples of these things, and, you know, a lot of very standard talking points get spewed and don't actually look at the underlying requirements for things like Otangelo just described to actually become feasible. And, you know, one of the reasons I really decided to do this debate was the opportunity to have a discussion with a biochemist like Dr. Garte, and, you know, really dive into the actual reality of what has to be taking place in order for the supposedly novel functions that have just occurred and have resulted in these magnificently complex engineering systems that are not just the results of random chemical reactions, they're extraordinarily controlled. And throughout the course of this debate, I really want to dive into, you know, what is actually observed in the lab and what we're actually would have to be executed by a biochemist in order to accomplish some of these new novel functions. Because ironically, it's exactly what we're doing in labs across the world right now. We're attempting to create new novel proteins, polypeptide chains, et cetera, to create new novel functions or to hybridize existing functions into, you know, one organism. And the complexity of that and the plausibility of that occurring, I'm very interested to find out if that's actually something that as a PhD biochemist, he thinks is remotely plausible to occur, even though humans and intelligent agents are able to make it occur, if he actually thinks it would happen in any other context. But before we get into open discussion to get into this in more detail, James, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And I was going to try and put this into context. You guys seeing my screen? Okay, so here we've got a English to binary converter. And something that I discussed in great detail in many debates and have gone into great detail on is the genetic code, the importance of it, the variety of the codes, the different things that have to be executed. As things we all know are very real world scenarios. We got single point mutations, we've got frame shifts, we've got all sorts of real problems that come into play in terms of disease and extinction. And then obviously in the context of supposed new functions coming into the equation and evolution, we have to get down into the real nitty gritty of what is actually being argued to be taking place. So let's look at this. So we got hello world. This is me showing atheists the obvious. Okay, so that's on one side. On the other side, we've got binary. So let's look at some basics of, let's just remove a space here. Oh man, now we got a Chinese symbol. Let's undo that. And now we're back to hello world. Let's delete a couple of these code sequences in binary. Oh, now we've got a major change. Now, something I'll talk to Dr. Garte about later is on the fidelity rate that's required for transcription and ongoing survival, let alone the premise of evolution. But let's jump over to another screen. Okay, how difficult can this possibly be to comprehend? So I'm using about 21 letters of the 26 in the English language. Obviously, we've got, I'm trying to match it up to amino acids in terms of what we have to account for. So while I'm using very similar letters between the two, obviously you should be able to perceive, jumping back and forth, that there's a significantly different sequence of code, even though we're using the exact same or very similar letters. Now, let's think about this in the context of making this more complicated. We've combined the two. Hello world, this is me showing atheists the obvious. How difficult can it possibly be to comprehend this? Now we're getting to something that's way more complicated. Now let's think about this. When you have to look at codons are being what's required, similar to these chunks of a Unicode that's being leveraged here, you're having to get the proper sequences, because let's change these ones to zeros. Oh, now we're got an O. Let's leave one. Oh, now I've got an 8. I mean, you start to look at the different variations. And you don't have to change very much.
Heads up, you got about a minute to a minute and a half left.
All right, I'm almost done. Then we start getting all sorts of changes that start kicking in. And very, very rapidly, you have the visualization of what we're talking about in terms of mutations, point mutations, frame shifts, and what is actually having to occur in order for new information to be expanded. Now, in the context of what we're viewing here, yes, we're seeing words, but in the world of proteins, and again, Dr. Garte can't counter me on this, but this is exactly what we're looking at in the spelling of proteins and the translation of gene sequences that are being done by the ribosome and all these different things. This is what's happening in the real world. Now, the letters may be different. The end, they might not be words, but we are looking at overall functions and different of the sequences that equal the functional outcome of the protein. And that's when you're talking about the combination of multiple polypeptides. And obviously, as again, Dr. Garte can talk about in much more detail, but this is a very short sentence. We're talking about things that are thousands and thousands long, and the level of fidelity that must be in place is extraordinarily high, or you have failure, and you actually have termination of the protein synthesis. So I just want to put this all into context. I'm wrapping up now, but I've talked about this concept in theory many times, and decided tonight I wanted to just kind of visualize this in a little bit more detail, and so we can stop talking about this in a purely hypothetical scenario, and let's look at this in terms of real world application of what is being argued by the evolution camp, that somehow these new functions have just come into existence through undirected process and mutation.
Thank you very much. We will kick it over to Team Evolution, and we'll give them the same flexibility in terms of their opening statement. So if you guys need an extra minute or two, we can do that. And so the floor is all yours, Erica and Sy. Thanks so much.
Cool. So I think I'm going first. So I will go ahead and move to sharing my screen. Sy and I discussed, I'm a little more long-winded than Sy, so I might be taking a little bit of a bias here on who is spending more time in the opening statement. And I will just go ahead and start now. So my presentation is titled Evolution, Biodiversity's Mechanism, because that is, put simply, what evolution is. The backdrop here is a bunch of anthropoid primates. I love all of these primates, and in particular, I love how all of these primates are incredibly well suited for their environments. They're all anthropoid monkeys. They're all essentially the same thing, and yet their environments are different, and they've tackled life's problems in different ways. This is what we would call natural selection. So let's talk about the case that Sy and I are making today. So Sy and I are making the case that life and modern biodiversity is the result of biological evolution by natural selection. The case that we are not making is that this process definitively precludes someone or something implementing evolution as a mechanism or perhaps spurring abiogenesis. As people directly involved in science, and with the scientific method in general, our goal is always to analyze the data, testing via experiment when we can, letting the results lead us to the conclusion with the understanding that such a conclusion may change as our data does. Now, in science, parsimony is key. Currently, every relevant field in science agrees that evolution by natural selection is the most parsimonious explanation for biodiversity on Earth. This is incredibly important because many of these fields are largely independent of one another, and yet they're reaching this same conclusion. Nearly as important is the ability of evolutionary theory to make correct predictions. So I'm going to make some predictions for this debate, and they're not really predictions now because you guys went first, but that our opponents are going to have models that boil down to the following simplified statements. This is absolutely simplifying it intentionally. But I think John is going to argue that DNA is a code, codes require coders, thus young Earth intelligent design is a thing, because both our opponents are indeed young Earth intelligent design advocates. And that Otangelo is going to argue that various aspects of biology are irreducibly complex, thus young Earth intelligent design is a thing. And I think that I was kind of dead on both of those. Now, as far as models go, neither of these statements can act actively as a model. They're just statements, and that's kind of my problem with both of them. But the interesting thing is, we're apes, the Earth is old, and evolution happens regardless of the nature of abiogenesis or the complexity or the irreducible nature of it. So let's talk about some of the cool predictions that evolutionary theory makes that ID doesn't. So intelligent design. So evolutionary theory predicted that life can be traced back to a single or a handful of common ancestors. This has been shown to be the case via thousands of phylogenetic analyses, all of which show a gradient of shared and novel traits across life with no line in between the clades. Evolutionary theory also predicted that the genome would contain gratuitous redundancy and junk DNA. That's kind of what we call it. Now, while this is contested by some members of ENCODE back in 2012, subsequent work, specifically some knockout tests, as well as testimony from actual ENCODE researchers themselves, have shown us that the maximum functionality for the human genome is likely between 12 to 25%. Primarily, ENCODE's results come from a very generous usage of the word, the definition of the word functional. So this is a very generous estimate for full functionality, and I'm happy to have that discussion. Evolutionary theory predicted that endogenous retroviruses were the remnants of ancient viruses embedded in the genomes of organisms, which can aid in tracing lineages. These ERVs revert back to behaving like viruses when xenotransplanted, and they corroborate classic phylogenies. Evolutionary theory predicted that humans would be shown to be genetically closest to the great apes, recapitulating what the morphology dictated decades earlier. Even creationist taxonomists were saying this. Linnaeus was famous for saying, I'm going to bring down the wrath of all the theologians because I simply can't figure out a reason to put humans as not apes. Now, not only are chimpanzees and bonobos our closest living relatives, but our shared similarity across the genome is greater than both those shared between rats and mice and those shared between lions and tigers. This technology is literally like a souped up paternity test, so it's not super complicated. Morphology, of course, corroborates this. Every single trait that we have that would make a gorilla, a chimpanzee, and all of, both of them apes, also includes humans as being members of the hominoid group. We have the Y-shaped molar, we have the brain to body size ratio, we have the limb ratio within error bars. This is just the case. When you're classifying humans, that's where we land. But paleontology is important too, because evolutionary theory predicted that we would see morphologic change over geologic time between any species separated by significant periods. Evolutionary theory predicted that none of these transitional forms would be hindered by their half structures. The evolution of any given trait must offer a fitness benefit at any stage that it's in. And boy, do we see that. We see it in the tetrapods, with each of these species being a stellar animal in its own right. Morphologic change through geologic time. We see it in the whales, morphologic change over geologic time, from terrestrial mammal to aquatic mammal. And we see it in birds, morphologic change over geologic time, from non-feathered theropods up through Archaeopteryx and indeed to the modern birds. Of course, anthropology is where I care about it because I study extant primates. Evolutionary theory predicted that we would find dozens of morphologically distinct ape species separated by geologic time in the fossil record that show a gradient in the emergence of human traits from the ape traits. And boy, howdy, do we see this. I have asked dozens of creationists where we draw the line here, which of these skulls are ape and which of these skulls are human. And not only do they all give inconsistent answers that differ wildly from one another, but not a single one can present criteria for how we can actually delineate which is ape and which is human. Of course, the problem is humans are apes. We have all of the traits that they have, so it's impossible to delineate. We could also talk about the importance of the transitional species such as the Australopithecines, which occupy what any creationist would have begged to see back in the 60s. It's a perfect ape man. We've got the parabolic palate, the bowl-shaped pelvis, the inline big toe. We've got the foramen magnum in the right position. The angle of the valgus knee and of the femoral head is appropriate. But geology is also important because evolutionary theory predicted that geologic time would separate the slow morphologic change dictated by natural selection. It also predicted that the environment is always changing and organisms will change in tandem. Geochemistry allows us to peer into paleo environments and accurately construct ancient environmental conditions, which has led us to discover more about the 5 mass extinctions. Each of these 5 mass extinctions alone precludes young Earth creationism and thus young Earth intelligent design due to the conditions necessary for their existence being absolutely impossible to cram into 6,000 years. Which leads me to my point on physics, which is that evolutionary theory in tandem with geology predicted that Earth was very ancient indeed. This is supported by the radioactive decay law. Now, the radioactive decay law covers the nature of decay rates and tells us that they don't change in meaningful ways over time. Creationists admit this. The RATE team, a crack team of creationist geologists discontinued in 2005, had to admit that a young Earth position cannot be reconciled with the scientific data without assuming that exotic solutions will be discovered in the future. No known thermodynamic process could account for the required rate of heat removal, nor is there any known way to protect organisms from radiation damage. This is the problem. When you cram 4.5 to 4.8 billion years of heat into a 6,000 year time period, you end up with a hot mess. At minimum, you're vaporizing the granitic crust of the Earth several times over. And at maximum, you're dealing with enough heat to match 5,000 trillion 1 megaton H-bombs, roughly 2.2 times 10 raised 38 ERGs, or an Earth's worth of TNT. Now, radiometric dating gets poo-pooed on by a lot of creationists, but one thing we can all agree on is that people like money, and a $257 billion a year industry depends on radiometric dating working via basin modeling. Actually, my fiance's brother is working in an oil field right now in West Texas, and they're working on a Permian site. But statistics is the newest and one of my new favorites to use when talking about intelligent design, because statistics tells us that common ancestry is essentially assured, statistically speaking, using a Bayesian analysis. For those of you who may not know, a small p-value is good when you're testing hypotheses because it tells you that whether or not you can reject the null. Now, this paper to the left says we overwhelmingly rejected both species and family separate ancestry, this is specifically within the primates, due to infinitesimal p-values. Many of these data sets reject species separate ancestry strongly. The probability of obtaining a test statistic more extreme than the one observed under species separate ancestry model is essentially approaching or greatly exceeding the probability of picking a correct atom at random among the estimated 10 to the 80th atoms in the known universe. And then they did this again with homologous proteins. Actually, it was the reverse. They did homologous proteins first, and then they did the primate one. So evolution makes thousands of predictions each and every year, from the truly important strides in virology and medicine, like those seen in HIV, to what I did with my thesis with primates, just comparing their dentition and sexual dimorphism. Intelligent design predicts nothing. This is the problem. It is the model that wasn't. people who propone for, or rather who propose intelligent design can't denote created kinds. They cannot grapple in a young Earth context, at least, which both our opponents are, with the overwhelming evidence for an ancient Earth from geology and physics, as well as the morphologic change over geologic time. They cannot clarify specifically what makes a design, and most importantly, intelligent design lacks any semblance of a model or testable predictions and relies almost entirely on poking holes in evolution. As such, it has an abysmal literature base and cannot be taken seriously as a scientific hypothesis alongside more robust works such as evolutionary theory, which leads me to my conclusion, talking super fast, which is, while we can enjoy a fun discussion, conventional science will still chug onward while we're having this, paying little to no mind to the ID community, consistently utilizing evolutionary theory to better the world around us. And that's my presentation.
Thanks so much, Eric. Erica, we will be switching it over to Dr. Sy Garte. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank each of my co-debaters here for their presentations. Also, before I forget, I just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. It's a couple of days from now, if I'm not mistaken. So I mean, that's a hard act to follow, what Erica just presented. So I'm not going to try to expand on anything that she said. My view is somewhat unusual, perhaps. Let me show. I only have one slide to show, so if I could do that, James, I will attempt it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Is that visible?
Yes.
Okay. It's my contention that actually evolution is not controversial. And just to start that off, this is a slide from the Answers in Genesis website. And if you look at the what you see on the right there in red and then branching into yellow is a phylogenetic tree. Looks very familiar to any evolutionist. And the difference, of course, is that it starts with something called the created cat kind, which is a species of animal that survived, got on the ark, unlike other potential members of that family. And once it got off the ark, it then diversified into all the species of Felix that we see today. And in fact, that part of the curve from the arc forward looks very much, and if you go into the details, it's almost identical to the kind of evolutionary tree that we draw when we do phylogenetics. Now, why is it that Answers in Genesis, which is one of the premier young Earth creationist, anti-evolutionist groups, actually talks about evolution? And by the way, they contend that this is evolution almost the same way as the way evolutionary biologists think of it. In other words, it occurs through natural selection, radiation, mutation. That's some slight differences there. But the reason they had to do that is because it was very clear that no matter how large the ark, all the current species on Earth could not possibly fit. And so what the comment is then that the Bible talks about kinds, and it was the kinds that incorporated all the current species. And once they got off the ark, we had the process of evolution. And I can stop sharing. Here it is. Okay. So and in fact, we also hear, I don't know how microevolution is a thing. There's a very little debate, for example, that bacteria can evolve to have resistance to antibiotics and other examples of evolution within a species. So the real argument is not whether evolution is true or not. The real argument is what can evolution explain and what can it not explain? And the first thing to talk about is abiogenesis, the origin of life, which I don't believe evolution can explain, and many other evolutionary creationists, as I am, also think that abiogenesis is off on its own. In fact, everybody thinks that way. Richard Dawkins doesn't talk about abiogenesis in relation to evolution. Darwin never mentioned the origin of life. He mentioned it actually only very briefly, but had no clue. And evolutionary theory is not equipped to deal with things like the origin of the genetic code, with things even like the origin of photosynthesis. Many of the amazingly complex and beautiful systems that we find in life occurred probably before what we call the last universal common ancestor, Luca. And in a way, I think of Luca as the analogy to the Big Bang. We can't go much back before Luca. We don't know how Luca arose. So there's all kinds of possible answers for that. And a lot of research is going on. It's after Luca that we understand that evolution now plays a role through the normal mechanism of natural selection, replication, mutation, etc. And then we get to humans, and this relates somewhat to Otangelo's remarks, but I won't go into it at this moment. We'll save it for the discussion. But again, I believe that when we get to humans, we do have some real problems in using evolutionary theory to explain everything we know about human beings. I'm not talking about the physical anthropology that Erica was talking about. That I think is fairly clear. I'm talking about behavioral aspects, including language, including some brain function of humans that really are, and I agree with Otangelo, were really quite remarkable. Now, the question comes up about design.
Got about a minute
again,
left.
It turns out that design is something that is almost universally agreed to. Richard Dawkins talks about design in biology. Again, the argument is not whether biology and living systems are designed, but how did they get designed? And there are many answers to that. But it's very difficult to argue against the possibility of design. So I think with that, yeah, I'm just about done. So we'll go on to the discussion.
Thanks so much. And I want to remind you, everybody, that all of our guests are linked in the description. So if you'd like to hear more from them, you can click on those links below. We'll jump into open conversation. The floor is all yours, all.
Well, real quick before we get going, since as usual, Erica spewed the usual talking points, even though never mentioned one thing about young Earth or deep time in either one of her opening statements. She wanted to go down that rabbit hole. But since you addressed me talking about code, Erica, Dr. Garte, could you please educate the individuals that are watching this right now that the genetic code is a literal code, it is not metaphor, nor is it simile. I had a very fun time watching your debate with Jeffrey Williams, where he went down that rabbit hole. And ironically, sir, I actually had a debate and I've had multiple conversations with your partner, and she also holds that it's not a literal code. So would you mind informing her and the rest of the audience here on MDD that it's actually a literal code, not metaphor, simile?
John, that's inaccurate. With the last conversation we had, what I said to you was, what I'm arguing is that there's a debate. Some people say there is, and some people say there isn't. We had this chat like last
Well, I'm pretty sure that this has been answered quite some time ago. So that's why I'm asking the PhD in the room if that has been well established for quite some time, that this is actually a code. It's not being debated inside the halls of academia in terms of what's actually being executed inside biological systems.
Yeah, that's correct. And I agree with Erica. She and I had discussed this, and I never heard her say that DNA is not a code. The genetic code is not a code. But anyway, to answer your question,
not you. I'm talking about her. If you watch my debate with her not that long ago, you would come to a very different conclusion. But continue.
Okay. Well, anyway, to answer the question, I've not only it's one of my pet peeves with atheists, and by the way, not with scientists, but with atheists who have come up with this very strange idea that the genetic code is a metaphor for a code. And I actually have on my YouTube channel, I actually have a response video to Rationality Rules, who made this point in a video in 2017. And it's inaccurate. He gets a lot of things wrong. I mean, basic biology, he gets wrong. So yeah, the genetic code is definitely a code. It has all the features of a code. It does whatever everything a code does. It's the first code, the first example of something that means something else in the universe. And it's, of course, in all of life. But having said that, the question of the genetic code's existence is, as I said, not answered by evolution. I know people who are studying the evolution of the genetic code, and it's an extremely difficult topic because it belongs in the abiogenesis.
Well, let me ask for a clarification on that then, because I have directly read papers and seen quite a few discussions about the variations in the genetic code being the direct result of evolution, not the origin, but the very few variations of it.
That's quite, that's right.
So I would have to say, I would have to disagree with you in the context that those changes are attempting to be explained and defended by evolutionary theory.
Yeah.
And I don't really understand, and I would love to get your opinion on this. When we have things that are start and stop codons that can be amino acid or reciprocals, et cetera, I'm not really sure how, without having multiple simultaneous mutations inside of a system for translation, and obviously, without collapse of protein synthesis, like how is it a remotely plausible scenario in which that can be accounted for?
It's very difficult and very rare, and that's why all of these variations are either in mitochondria or in very primitive organisms, some of which have very high mutation rates. You're right, it takes at least 2 mutations, one in the tRNA genes and one in the amino acyl tRNA synthetase genes to have a change in the code. But the real problem with evolution of code is kind of what you alluded to. If you suddenly have a stop codon, which used to code for lysine, all those proteins that have lysine now stop in the wrong place. So they're very rare, but occasionally they can happen. And I actually have a slide on this, but I think I'll show it later if we need to.
Well, I appreciate you clarifying that, because that's one of the things I think gets glossed over on a very regular basis. Of,
yeah,
things that actually have to be accounted for in this, and then from a macro view, when we're talking about expansion, oh, we have a duplicate gene that just turns into a new functional protein outcome. Let me kind of forget about like what's actually having to be accomplished to result in this new novel function. It's not just it's chemical reactions. A little bit different than.
Let me address that, because you raised that question in your opening to me. How is it possible to get the kind of thing that you showed with your software code? How does that work in proteins? And that's a real good question. And evolutionary biologists have thought about it and proposed various things. There's an answer from an evolutionary biologist named Andreas Wagner. He's German. He wrote a book called The Arrival of the Fittest. And what he admits is that it's not enough just to say, okay, you have a mutation and you get a more fit phenotype. How do you get to that fit phenotype? When you have, as you showed, you have a set of codons which code for a very specific protein that works quite well. And now you have a mutation. What are the chances that that mutation is going to make the protein, quote, better or more fit? And here's where biology or biochemistry differs from software. And that is, it's extremely robust. The robustness of proteins is quite remarkable. And by robustness, what I mean is, and this is what Wagner and other people have also done, is if you take a particular protein sequence and you make changes in it, you do site-specific mutagenesis, you change one amino acid for another, it's amazing how many changes you can make and the protein still retains its function. That's what is meant by robustness. And so what he did was he kept making changes and he kept getting the same function out of the protein, even when several, or sometimes even half of the amino acids in a protein had been altered to a different amino acid. And then he made one more change and all of a sudden a different function appeared, because now that last change was such that it changed the conformation of the protein, it changed the active site, it changed what substrates could bind to it. So all of a sudden you have what looks like, wow, a mutation out of the blue, but in fact, it's a mutation that occurred after several other mutations that had no effect on the protein function.
Precursors, they're precursor mutations.
Yes, exactly. So the other thing that's very important to understand is that we talk about evolution occurring from mutations, and most people, and I did too at one point, think that, okay, an animal's walking around, everything's fine, gets a mutation, and now it changes. And it gets natural selection. That's almost never happens. What mutations do is they cause variation in the proteins. So within a population, you'll have, within the four of us, for example, if you take any gene, we'll have slight differences in the gene sequence. Not because we had a mutation, but we inherited that mutation from some previous ancestor. Now, so you could have a mutation. Most mutations are harmful, and they kill the cell, and that's it. Who cares? The cell goes away. The next largest group are neutral. They have no effect. So you have all these neutral mutations hanging around that don't really have any positive effect. And then the environment changes. It gets colder. And so if you had a mutation that caused longer hair, not when it happened, but maybe 10,000 years later, those animals that have that longer hair do better than the ones with the shorter hair. So now that mutation has produced a selective advantage. It didn't do it originally. It did it when the environment had the effect on the fitness of that mutation.
Now, in line with that, I don't want you and I to be dominating this, so if folks feel free to jump in here, but I mean, I hear those types of supposed defenses of evolutionary theory on a regular basis, but as we discover more and more, we're realizing, maybe not in every case, but in many, many cases, we're starting to discover that the capacity for that longer hair already existed and now is being expressed. So this ultimately boils back down to the dramatic difference. In the chart you put up there, oh, there's this very similar phylogenetic trees, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, okay, fair enough, no problem. The key difference was the capacity pre-existing, or did it form after the fact?
The thing is, it doesn't
and that's the primary thing, because Erica, yes, it does. If the capacity already existed, then your entire concept of evolution coming from things that do not yet exist and then being created, new novel functions coming into existence through mutation and natural selection, is dramatically different than the capacity already being in place and now being expressed based on the new environmental variable factors, which we are now being able to clearly delineate in research. And then beyond that, the last thing I'm gonna say, and I'll shut up for a while, is I find it very entertaining, Erica, that you continue to try and go down the rabbit hole of the the junk DNA, the non-functional genome, because that is the literal antithesis of that is what's being discovered.
No, I'm sorry, John. You are.
I'm going to finish my point, and I'm going to shut up, and you can
short and pithy, John.
Have we or have we not been discovering all the way up until this year, based on new observation technologies and research technologies, that there's whole portions of the genome that we thought were completely inoperable, didn't do anything. But now, based on cell type, it turns out whole chunks of the genome that we thought had no function, no activity whatsoever, we're now discovering, oh wait, it's totally active, but only in this cell type, because up until relatively recently, A, we were not being able to look at things in vivo, and B, we were looking at mostly, the same types of cell types versus looking at the going into deeper and deeper detail of the hundreds of different cell types that we have.
Gotcha.
So
Want to give Erica a
that's an
chance to
important thing we
respond.
have to look at.
And
Okay,
then
so,
once we
yeah,
hear, well, let's give Erica plenty of time to respond, and then also eventually we'll work our way to poor Otangelo, who hasn't gotten to talk yet. Go ahead, Erica.
I know. Yeah. So first of all, no, John is entirely incorrect on that. And I've actually, not only have I asked plenty of people, but this is like open source on Google Scholar. You can look at the ENCODE researchers' comments on the project themselves. What John is talking about is the fact that we are increasingly finding smaller and smaller and smaller portions of the genome that sometimes has some function with regard to regulation, or it's doing some new thing or whatever. But this is why I mentioned knockout tests in my opener, because you can take a mouse and knock out half of the thing's genome, and this animal is going to move forward, have mouse babies with another mouse, and those mice are also capable of reproduction. And what that suggests, and when I say suggests, I mean heavily supports, is the fact that most of the genome is not doing anything. Now, that's kind of the point, because evolutionary predicted that there would be quite a bit of redundancy. So not only are you incorrect in what the literature is actually saying, but experimentally, that idea has been blown away quite some time ago. Now,
Okay, last thing I'm going to say, let Otangelo go. Erica,
because John jumped around to quite a few topics as well. You know, you do the touch and go. Now, with regard to the deep time, as I explained in my opener, deep time is irrevocably tied to evolutionary theory. The reason deep time is brought up, and why I bring it up every time, is because not only are you and Otangelo both vocal young Earth creationists, but deep time and evolution cross-corroborate one another at every single level. So the two are you can't parse them apart. And in fact, geology offers some of the most concrete preclusions, not just to young Earth creationism, but because of how it corroborates evolutionary theory, indirectly, this creates huge problems for intelligent design. The last thing I want to say is, again, and you know, absolutely no disagreement with Sy. You know, I don't know what kind of what literature he's read on it, but to prepare for this, I did quite a decent literature search. And yes, there are, as I said in our conversation last week, John, there are individuals who say that DNA is a literal code. There are other individuals that say it is metaphorically a code, and there are yet still others who say that it has nothing to do with the code. And a better analogy, because of how proteins are assembled within the actual cells, would be an ingredient list. So you know, you can say this is done, this is over with, whatever, but that's just not what the literature is saying. And I would know, I read all your papers and took notes on them. So
Erica, even if it's hang on, she just directly addressed me. Hang on, I have two sentences. Erica, even if it's she just addressed me, James, and I'm going to shut up after this.
I do. I'm happy with what I've said. And I can provide links as well if need be to back up every claim that I've made, or you can just go back and watch my PowerPoint where I've cited my sources.
Yes, I want to add in regards of DNA, there is always a confusion here. When someone says DNA is a code, or it's in a metaphorical way a code, in my understanding, DNA is not a code. What do I mean with that? DNA is a semantophoretic molecule. It is like a hard disk in the computer. So DNA is just a deoxyribonucleotide. So what happens? It stores actually genetic information through the genetic code. Why? Because the codons, they are triplet codons, which are assigned to amino acids. And there are 64 different triplet codons, which assign to 20 amino acids. So there is an assignment here. And we are talking about that assignment, which is actually the code or a cipher, or however you want to call it. And the huge problem here for naturalists, for materialists, is that assignment or giving meaning to something always comes from intelligence. So you have to account for the fact that these three nucleotides, these codons, they are assigned to 20 amino acids. So where does that assignment come from? That is one problem. The other problem is you have genetic information stored in the genome, which directs the making of proteins and also the making of microRNAs, which direct the expression of the genome through the gene regulatory network. So, and then you have also to account for the hardware. That is like, for example, the ribosome, which is an extremely complex factory, which is in a literal sense a factory which produces and assembles proteins in an enormously complex manner. And the ribosome is life essential. Materialists, they have to account for and explain how the ribosome could have emerged prebiotically before actually life even started. And we are talking here about a molecular factory which has about 200 assembly proteins. The ribosome has to be assembled first. It has 75 cofactors which help to assemble the ribosome. And there are signaling pathways inside the ribosome. There are the 64 tRNAs, which also are essential. There are the amino acid tRNAs, which are essential. This is a multi-part factory which has to work in a joint venture together in order to manufacture proteins. And
gotcha. Just because there are a lot of points, we do have to kind of switch over to someone new soon, just because there's a lot to keep track of, both for the speakers and the audience.
Okay.
If either Sy or Erica wants to respond, and then I know that John had a response for Erica that we have to get back to.
Yeah, Sy, be my guest. I talked last.
Well, I mean, Otangelo knows that I agree with him about the genetic code, the ribosome, and I think that, as I said in my opening, the issue of abiogenesis is an incredibly difficult, controversial, and wide open field of science that I believe also, because I am a Christian, I believe also should include theology. But I don't see that with evolution. In other words, as I said before, once we have Luca, once we have a cell that has those amazing components in it, and I mentioned a couple, but there are many more than that. Once we have that, I don't see the argument against evolution, either scientifically, theologically, or logically, in fact. Now, one thing I think is important, and this goes to John, is really to understand that when you study biology, and I think everyone here knows this, you find that logic doesn't work very well. Okay, there are a lot of things about biology that really define logical. It's not the way we would do it. Okay, which is why I don't like the term intelligent design. I believe there is design in life. I call it divine design because I think it originates from God. But it's not like that God is a really clever software engineer and kind of made things the way we do. And what I think about evolution is that it's a natural law. It's a natural law like gravity. It's a beautiful natural law. And theologically, I believe that God created all natural laws, including gravity, including evolution. And it's brilliant because it works. And it works in a way that we're not completely sure that we understand every detail of how it works. There are some places that have to be filled in. But Erica pointed out the amazing consistencies between, both fossil records, molecular biology, genetic analysis. Everything fits together to give a very coherent picture of the general picture of evolution. And the reason I stressed that, even young Earth creationists accept some form of evolution is because it's really undeniable that that's the way life works. And I actually think it's time to sort of maybe drop arguments against evolution, maybe combine them with intelligent design to some degree, if that theologically useful.
So in line with what you're saying there, I think just needs to go back to a key point that I made that I did not to you. I'm not directly what I'm about to say to you, but it seems to the vast majority of the just say atheist evolution types that I deal with online, the entire premise of something being pre-programmed seems to fly over their head, of pre-existing capacity, and through adaptation and species and the pre-existing templates, if you will, that can be expressed to create a new species already being pre-existent. To be honest, when you actually look at things, you see this. Like, the capacities were here. Now we have alteration, and now we have this. In your point that you were making about we wouldn't do it this way, it's not logical, I'm actually gonna have to categorically disagree with you. What you're actually stating, or what's I think led to your position you just took there, is that up until very, very recently, our technology wasn't at a level to even understand what the hell is going on from a technological perspective inside of our bodies. So when we're getting into dual use syntax, we're getting into three-dimensional scaffolding, I'm talking about from a coding perspective, when we're getting into simultaneous computation, and all the different things that are occurring inside of our bodies to enable life to exist and for these complex systems to function. We didn't even know it was possible to be done. Right. Now, in computer technology and in nanotech that humans are trying to accomplish right now, we're like, oh my goodness, we didn't even know we didn't even know to look for this, right? So now, for example, we know that there's multiplex coding going on inside the genome. And we thought about that, right? But until relatively recent modern times, and by that I mean like last 30 years, it wasn't even remotely plausible to be able to actually do that. We knew about it in theory, but actually executing that technologically was not even remotely feasible. Now we're finding out this is exactly what's happening in enabling life to exist.
There you go.
And so the point I'm making is to take the position that because we don't know how something does, or our technology hasn't quite gotten advanced yet, is not evidence in favor of intelligent agency being an active player. I don't mean this as an insult by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I think it just comes from like humans in general. We didn't even know it was possible. And yet we've been arguing that all this stuff happened without that requirement being in the equation. To me, that's like a child coming in and being like, oh, well, it's just how it happens. And then you're the parent looking at it and being like, hang on, there's a ridiculous amount of engineering that went into, this toy you're playing with, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, there's a member of Discovery Institute, Michael Denton. I don't know if you've read his.
Yeah.
So he is a great fan of Richard Owen, who was a contemporary of Darwin, who postulated that there were biological laws that we don't understand, and that's very much in tune with what you're saying about capacity. So I just give an example. We know that there's a lot of creatures can fly. Okay, insects, birds, bats, from all different phyla. And they all fly a fairly similar way. They all fly by flapping wings and creating a vacuum underneath. But there's no creature that has ever developed jet propulsion. Now, there's no reason why they couldn't, because there are jets in biology. There are creatures that shoot water or air out the back. But no creature has ever figured out how to fly with jet propulsion. And okay, that's a sort of a silly thing to say, except that this may be an indication of some kind of biological law, that not everything is possible. And Erica can go into more detail on this.
Yeah, I'd love to in just a second.
Yeah, I'll just finish. One thing that's important to know about evolution is it doesn't promise everything. There are laws. There are things that, as you said, capabilities, capacities that biology has, and some that they don't have. And so, not everything goes. And I know Erica has more to say on that.
Yeah. So I totally agree with you, Sy. I mean, the evolution of organisms is entirely constrained by the environment that it's in. This is exactly how creatures change to meet the needs and increase the fitness in a given environment. This is why oftentimes people mix up what fitness is and why it's important to define, because for instance, a bacteria that may wreak havoc in your body when in the presence of antibiotics will be destroyed, and then you get antibiotic resistance, and then all of a sudden this organism is thriving in the antibiotic resistance environment. Then you put it back in the original one, and it's less fit than its progenitor. Well, that's because fitness is defined by an environment. Now, I want to talk about something really quickly that I think is very very interesting about this conversation. To me, it seems like from the intelligent design team, what we see a lot of is incredulity at the micro level and missing the forest for the trees at the macro level. So it's a lot of, I don't think that X can happen at the micro level, therefore allow me to impose arbitrary lines in what a species at a macro level can or cannot do. Now, this would be fine if it weren't for the fact that multiple fields corroborate the fact that large organisms can cross these boundaries and frequently do. So this is my problem with intelligent design, and you know, I've met plenty of theistic evolutionists and regular biologists alike, and this is why ID isn't typically taken seriously in conventional science, because there's no model. It doesn't make any predictions. All it does is point at things that look complex, like the genetic code or cells being factories, and say, how could that happen? And you know, I study, as everyone here knows, large species. So change in large species there's not really all that much going on. You've already, like Sy said earlier, at Luca, you've got all the equipment there. It's small tweaking to get this vast array of biodiversity that we see in the itty bitty little corner of the tree of life that is multicellular organisms. And so because of that, macroevolution is really and truly doing all of these things. This is what evolution predicts. This is what we see in molecular phylogenies. This is what's recapitulated in the fossil record. And multiple different levels of each of these fields cross-corroborate one another. So two different molecular phylogenies will corroborate. The age of the Earth will corroborate certain layers where fossils are found, and where those fossils are found will corroborate the molecular divergence of two species. So from an intelligent design position, especially from a young Earth intelligent design position, what you guys, in my opinion, and you know, you can take that for what's worth, what you have to do is you have to present a competing model that can not just say, here's a couple of ideas, but say, my idea is better and precludes your idea because XYZ. But I've never heard that from any folks at ID, and I don't think that I will. So I'll pass it on to Otangelo.
Of course, if a creator was involved to create life and biodiversity, and he will not repeat the event, so we cannot test it. But what we know is that intelligence can instantiate certain features, like multi-part irreducible complex machines, which require foresight with a distant goal. And we see that actually not only in abiogenesis in regards of the origin of life, but also, for example, in regard to photosynthesis, which emerged very early in the history of life. And if you have studied it, then Erica, you know that photosynthesis is enormously complex. And we have there, for example, the oxygen evolving complex, which makes oxygen. And if you go into the details and into the proteins, you will see that there are 3 or 4 proteins which are involved in splitting the water. And there is the molybdenum center, the cofactor, which is also involved, and you need a water environment around it, which is actually produced by these proteins. And if that is not there, you will not have the split of water, and you will not have oxygen, and you will not have advanced life. So once you don't have an explanation just for a feature like this, you can forget the entire narrative that no intelligence was necessary to create all biodiversity. Now, in regards of evolution, I think there is a broad agreement that microevolution and speciation that occurs, but that is actually secondary speciation, which is split of populations which cannot interbreed anymore. But the big question, which has never been demonstrated, is the rise of big different and new features like eyes, like ears, like legs, like bones, like multicellularity, all these kind of things. And that is a big open question, and science has no explanation on this. Now, the gene-centric view, Erica, I think it is long due that this is be put behind, because we know that epigenetic information is far a bigger factor actually which directs the construction of body architecture than only genetic information alone. I catalog over 30 epigenetic codes which are all involved in construction of organism form. And I think the view has to be shifted from a gene-centric view to a holistic view, or to a systems biology view, where many or more factors are actually considered. And that is epigenetic codes, that is signaling pathways, and that is a special gene regulatory network, which you cannot simply change or mutate. Davidson, which was basically a pioneer in research of the gene regulatory network, he made it very clear that you cannot just mutate things and then expect that things will go well. No, there is very, very narrow space to change things, and if you don't, then the whole thing goes havoc and doesn't work. So I think that the view has to be expanded, where epigenetic information is taken into consideration to explain large organismal construction. And once that you consider that, you have to ask yourself, well, do unguided events actually account for that kind of complexity? And I would say no, because all these epigenetic codes, they have also to be explained. Where did they come from? First, you have to actually make them, and then, like for example, in histones, there is the histone code, and there are the histone tail, which is read by readers, which is erased, and there are other proteins which actually write on the histone code, and there is communication between them, and that regulates how the histones are, the genetic information is expressed, and all that kind of complexity, which is far greater than anyone has ever imagined, that has to be accounted for. And I think that natural, unguided, non-intelligent mechanisms simply are not sufficient to explain that kind of complexity.
Well, you know, just as a parenthetical, I published 2 papers in the last few years about gene regulatory networks. And these are model networks. I didn't look at actual real biological networks because that's extremely difficult. But I found the models to be so, with only a few genes, like 5 genes, when you start looking at how these things work, it's what Otangelo said, it's staggeringly complex. But that happens simply because of the mathematical and I guess you could say stochastic nature of what happens when you have one thing that regulates other things that have, you know, that regulate themselves and go backward and forth. And so what it is true that you can derive the idea that these very complex systems must have been designed by an intelligent designer, but it's also true that in many cases, including, for example, the arising of certain gene regulatory networks, they can also arise because of stochastic processes that lead to, naturally, just in the computer, and John may be able to back me up on this, you can get incredibly complex results just by writing the right code and writing the right model and having it go. And, you know, people have done that. So I don't think that complexity by itself is a sign of non-evolution or of intelligent design. I think in some ways complex, when you talk about the protein synthesis system, I agree, that level of complexity and that level of just, I don't even have a word for it. Complexity is not a good word. It's just amazing. That's really hard to explain from an evolutionary point of view. But as I said, we're talking abiogenesis here, and there's no good model. Actually, John asked me at the very beginning about replication fidelity. Is that right?
Yep. Yes, sir.
So I'll just say very quickly that my last paper, which just is still in press, it's about to come out, was on that issue, on the question of replication fidelity. And yeah, in order for life to work, including survival and evolution, the accuracy of DNA replication is 99.99999%. It can't be 100% because there has to be some errors to allow for variation, mutation, but the accuracy is incredibly high, and not just for DNA replication, but also for protein synthesis. And you can't explain that as an evolutionary model. So
did your, I think in line with this, one of the things that has to be discussed in how that fidelity is accomplished is the error correction mechanisms.
That's right. So that's how it's accomplished. There are error correction mechanisms that are, I mean, whoever you are, whether you read about these things and you just say, oh my God, wow. I mean, that's amazing stuff. And they're all over the place, these error correction mechanisms. Did they evolve? Well, they might have evolved if evolution was possible. The problem is that before you had accurate replication, you couldn't have evolution, because evolution requires accurate replication. So that's a real problem, and that's what I'm focusing on. But
it's up to that. I think is taken for granted is from a communication theory, information theory perspective. Everything that we're doing in our technology right now is we have incredibly complex, multiple layers of error correction codes.
Right.
They're separate from just the actual information code. You have error correction codes themselves.
That's right.
That are needed in order to account for the noise in the transmission channel.
Right.
And we have the literal parallel.
Yes. Yeah. And I agree.
And I'm not saying I know you agree with me. I'm just saying that I think it's something that has to be looked at from the macro view of all of these things. Is these things exist? It's not just like they're in place. And for me, this in context where you're talking about like protein synthesis, for example, just the differences between prokaryote versus eukaryote,
right,
to me is rather significant. And that's under the quote unquote, evolution umbrella, is going from the prokaryote transcription and translation process to the eukaryote. Yeah. And to my knowledge, nobody has an answer for that. Am I wrong? I mean, I concede to you if there is an answer for that, but as far as I know, there is none.
No, I don't know of it. I think there may be one, but in other words, the really major molecular changes that go on from prokaryote to eukaryote translation are not understood in terms of mechanism of how they develop.
There's recent work on it that I can put in the comments
there
later.
may be that I'm not aware of. Yeah, that'd be good. But these are all areas of research. And speaking of which, and this is expanding on something Erica said, evolutionary biology is not fixed and static. Darwinism is long gone, whatever that originally was. Neo-Darwinism is long gone. So evolutionary biology, like most good scientific theories, is in constant flux and continuously changing. And I've written about something called the extended evolutionary synthesis, which includes some of the things everyone has talked about: horizontal gene transfer, epigenetics, which Otangelo mentioned, a lot of other things, niche construction. There's a lot more interesting mechanisms for how evolution works than the original. Okay, it's a point mutation, a structural gene, you get a change in the genotype, change in phenotype, natural selection, boom. That's oversimplified. That's not a good theory anymore. And nobody in evolutionary biology, except maybe somebody like Richard Dawkins, who's not really a scientist anymore, but he's slow to catch on. But the whole symbiogenesis from what's her name?
Lynn Margulis.
Thank you. Yes, right. Lynn Margulis, and all these other ideas. I mean, Dennis Noble, who is a British physiologist, has written some great books about anti-gene centric stuff. Okay, that it's not the genes, it's other stuff. It's holistic. So a lot of the arguments that I'm hearing that you guys are making, I'm agreeing with, because they're actually part of evolutionary theory. Okay, evolutionary theory is not your grandfather's evolutionary theory. It's not even my evolutionary theory, because I'm pretty old.
Well, and can I add something onto that side that I think is really important, is that, you know, if you're walking through the desert and you stumble across some kind of pyramid or structure, you see the structure and you think, oh, wow, that's really cool. Like someone ancient built this structure, obviously, or maybe, I don't know, if you're an Ancient Aliens person, then you're like, oh, wow. I mean, I think that stuff is not a big fan. But you look at this structure and you would say, this structure exists. Here are all of the facets of this structure. We can study the structure. We can study the nature of the structure. And we can get a ton of information about that without knowing how that structure was built. You know, it's kind of like the origins or bust thing is kind of, it's very silly to me as someone who looks at the large scale stuff, because it's like, you know, take a computer, for instance. I can look at my computer. I can know what my computer does. I can know how to code things on it. I can tell you a lot of stuff about it. I don't need to know who made it to do that. And the fact of the matter is—
Hang on, would you deny that somebody had to make it?
Well, in the case of a computer, yes, for part of the example.
And the pyramid?
We can switch it to an arch. I mean, let's say—
so is the technology that enables you to exist more or less complex and more intricate and more interdependent than computer technology?
I mean, I'm using it for a simple segue, but if you want to get into it, we can use an example I used with Otangelo the other day when we were discussing. I'm happy to do that, John.
Well, I'm saying if you're going to go down the rabbit hole, I don't need to know about who created it, or I can't. Are you making the statement that we should just ignore trying to figure out who?
Oh God, no.
Or are you saying that we can't actually make the inference?
No.
Would have had to been in place.
The case that I'm making is that regardless of how abiogenesis happened, whether someone did it or whether someone implemented the fine tuning to it, doesn't change the fact that you're an ape, you're related to other apes, and that animals change on the large scale, and that the Earth is very ancient, and that these things corroborate each other.
How many different novel genes are there between us and chimps?
Very, very few. Less than between rats and mice, John.
It's not 1,400?
It's less than between rats and mice comparatively when you account for the size of the entire genome.
Okay, so how many base pairs is that?
The differences between humans and chimps?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how you're measuring it.
Well, I mean, somewhere between, at the low end, 35 million, correct?
Wait. Are you trying to do this on like humans and chimps actually aren't as close as people say? Is that what?
No. We're talking about from a plausibility perspective. You're claiming that this is just a totally reasonable thing to conclude this somehow happened. Okay, so
John,
how much time from your model?
About you that
you make fun of my model from your model. How much time is there between the previous ancestor between humans and chimps and now?
Oh, John, are you sure you want to get into the answer?
For your timeline, what is it?
I mean, right now it's looking like 7 to 13, depending on who you talk to, depending on which you're looking at.
Okay, cool. So, how many mutations per generation?
Oh, this is cool. I actually have the math. I did this math myself. Let me pull it up.
We have a bit of time. This might be the might have to be the last issue that we can discuss before we go into the Q&A, as we have a lot of questions.
Yeah, so while I'm pulling this up, because John, I actually covered this in a video where I performed the math myself and showed that the predictions made by the differences between the two genomes is precisely predicted by evolutionary theory. It was actually some very fun stuff. I'll link the actual video in the description, but if memory serves, it was actually in my recent I think I'm done with these creationists. Which
so while you're finding all that, Dr. Garte, do you think it's actually plausible that 35 million mutations can be conserved in that timeline?
I don't know what you mean by conserved. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, we have no less than 1,400 novel genes that exist in humans that do not exist in chimps. So I'm just saying, if there's 1,400, right, completely unique genes.
Well, they're not completely unique. They're not de novo genes. There is something called de novo genes.
Well, true. I believe the ones I'm referring to, I believe, aren't de novo. So that's point one. And then in conjunction with that, in terms of differences in gene expression, we have, in terms of like cognitive function, for example, it's known beyond doubt that there's many papers on this, that MI and siRNAs are causing dramatic variations in gene expression.
Yes, quantify the expression for us. Do the thing that's not actually been done in the literature, because that expression difference has not actually been quantified. And here's the math for you, by the way. So
I'm pretty sure I have a paper on it that said it was between
the indel one, yeah, I saw that in your cast of papers. The indel one, yeah, it doesn't.
We do have to. I want to give a chance to Erica. I think you were pulling up some materials.
Yeah, so I've got that. So I've got pulled up, and then I've got one or two more things to say.
Erica,
and then I'm happy to pass it on. So the difference between humans and chimps, if we're assuming a 7 to 13 million year divergence, a generation time of 25 years, which is the average for a chimp, and you need 30 million mutations. So if you've got 7 million times, or divided by 25 times 2, because we're looking at diploid organisms, you get approximately 560,000 generations. The haploid mutation rate is approximately 50 mutations. And you end up with 560,000 times 50, which equals 28 million mutations, or approximately 52 million mutations, which is more than appropriate given our estimates. And what Sy said is true, actually. These aren't de novo. The difference is that even when you account for expression, and I've looked into this gratuitously because I study extant primates. That's what I'm getting my master's degree in. So I have to know comparative genomics. So humans and chimpanzees, humans and all of genus Pan, no matter how you cut it, no matter which gene you're looking at, whether you're looking at the X or the Y chromosome, so long as you're looking at the sequence identity, which is what matters with heritability and relationship, you end up with humans grouped with genus Pan and the rest of the great apes and the hominoids. If you were going to reasonably say that rats and mice are related, or that lions and tigers are related, John, there is no physical way, chemically, genetically, however you want to look at it, by which you can separate humans from the hominoids, even if you're including expression. Because I've seen some of those indel papers recently. They don't quantify it. All it is essentially saying, yes, there are indeed some differences in expression. Of course there are. We're separate species. Humans aren't chimps. We are closely related to chimps. And to what Otangelo said earlier.
Erica, don't spew that standard idiotic.
Hold on one second.
I
do have to let her finish.
I'm not saying humans are chimps. I'm really tired
I
of
do have to let her
every single
finish.
debate.
I hate to mute you guys. You're both in the penalty box, but just basically, if Erica had a chance, or I think that Erica had a last point that she was about to start. If it is related to one of the actual things that John brought up, we can cover it. If it's not, let's skip it. And what we'll do is we do have to jump into the Q&A pretty quick here. So let me know if it was relevant to one of John's things that he had brought up. Otherwise, like I said, it would be best to skip it.
It was actually related to Otangelo's opening statement, but it's very pithy. The relationship between the evolution of language, I can, because again, extant primates, that's actually what I specialize in. We had a whole block on the evolution of language, because as it turns out, pretty much all the way up to about a 5-year-old's language capacity, you can map that in extant primates. Chimpanzees have the gestural repertoire that is instinctively identical to what we see in 3-year-old humans. You've got Campbell's monkeys that show syntax and grammar in their vocalizations, and all monkey vocalization patterns from geladas upwards, that's all your anthropoids, follow Zipf's and Menzerath's law, which are the base laws of all human language. So while language is something that's special to humans, I agree, we take that and dial it up to 11. This isn't something that there's this huge stopgap in, as has been very common in conversations with creationists and intelligent design advocates. It's not that there's this huge gap and, oh no, wow, scientists are floundering. 9 times out of 10, and I actually can't think of a 1/10, so I'll just say 10 times out of 10 that I've encountered it, that gap is bridged by empirical work of hardworking scientists who have gone out there into the swamps and whatever and recorded these vocalizations, quantified them, coded them into something like RStudio, and shown which linguistic laws they occupy and abide by. And what that tells us is that all the way up into some of the dumber monkeys, we're seeing usage of syntax, suffixes that actually change the meaning of the word. And while the vocabularies are very limited, they skyrocket the second that you get up into the great apes. So I would love to have that conversation with you at some point, Otangelo. I'm done. I was just going to say I'd love to have a chat with you on the evolution of language, Otangelo, because as it turns out, one of my colleagues in my program actually did her thesis on the evolution of language and studied Gibbons. So
it looks like this may be a decent time to go to the Q&A. There's always got to be one side that gets the last word in these conversations, and so given that we did have Otangelo and John start, we'll let Erica have the last word on this part of the conversation. Do want to say thanks, everybody, all of our guests.
I think it would probably be good, James, if both parties got to say a last word. I think that's only fair. I don't think John and Otangelo have had a chance to. I monologued first, John monologued, then I monologued, and so I think they should probably. I'm sure Sy would be amenable to splitting whatever last word we have with them so that they feel like they can get what they want to say into.
I'm not compelled to do that just because the only reason, don't get me wrong, I do like everybody having a chance to respond. I'm totally open to having you guys again. It's just that we do have a lot of questions, and we're already an hour and 45 minutes into this thing.
Oh,
so
wow.
we do want to kind of move into these questions quick. Want to say thanks so much for your questions, folks. All of our guests are linked in the description, so if you want to hear more from them, you can by clicking on those links. Also, hey, maybe we'll have a round 2, as this has been there's been a lot of positive feedback. And a question from Mike Billars to start the Q&A. Ask Maddox and Otangelo. Okay, just a friendly troll says, I'm sorry for your loss. Next, Caleb says, congrats on the clear win, Maddox and Otangelo. Dueling friendly trolls. Steven Steen, speaking of trolls, says, Sy is definitely the prettiest debater tonight. Channel. Thanks for that, Steven Steen. And then it says, channel housekeeping stuff. Thank you, appreciate that. I forgot to mention that in the channel housekeeping. You're right, Steven. And then Mike Billars says, Maddox is on, so hit the dislike, but Erica is on, so hit the like, in that order. We'll appreciate that. He is one of the most controversial men there. Look at him there, stroking his beard. He's just plotting his next move. Thank you for your question. Brennan says, things are too complex for me to comprehend, therefore, God is this dude's whole argument. Well, what do you guys think? Otangelo and John, I'm not sure I can't remember when they said that, but do you agree?
I'm responding to them because I don't know how many times I have to tell these idiots that is not the conclusion that is being reached. Oh, I don't know, it could be happened, therefore it's God. It's literally the antithesis of the entire point that is being made. I make arguments, and so does Otangelo, in direct relation to things, whether or not they are plausible, and do direct comparisons and provide examples all the time of how in no other context this stuff would be considered remotely rational to think could happen without intelligent agency being the direct catalyst. And I yield.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. And we do have, let's see, we have some love out there. This one was from Lord Bryant, who said, tell Dr. Garte I said hi. Absolutely will do. Hello, Dr. Garte, on behalf of Bryant. And then Brennan, thank you for your question. Said, things are too we got that. Said, only science can make specific prediction like this brilliant woman and show it to come true. Seems that cannot be done with God.
Is that something I respond? I mean, I appreciate that. If that's a compliment, I certainly appreciate it. Yeah, predictions that come true are the hallmark of a good model, and that's where I think intelligent design fails. There are no predictions. There is no model. It's just evolution bad. Things look complex, and that's fine if you want to say that, but the legit folks who are out there, like Sy, for instance, trying to figure these things out and really get into the meat of, okay, these things are really complicated. How do they come to be that way? What really is the answer? Instead of saying, complex, what are you going to do? Yes.
So again, Erica is embodying the atheist who doesn't actually listen to the words that come out of my mouth. Because I literally just addressed that same point that you just made in response to a question. So apparently you weren't paying attention, as usual.
Well, I guess if you think I was talking about you, then you might have a bit of an ego thing.
No, you were talking about a concept. You were talking about a concept that I was just addressing.
In general,
you just reiterated the same concept that the person in the super chat also
must go to the
stated.
next one.
So again, it's literally the question after that you're using that same response. Apparently you're not paying attention.
Okay, I hate to do this. We do have to go to the next one. I hate to do this. In all fairness, I think the super chat was targeting John and Otangelo, so I want to give them the last word. Communist propagandist says, Erica, how does morphology explain your huge brain? Thank you for that.
That's kind. I descend from a line of organisms with increasingly large brain cases and am no larger than anybody else living at this same time period. But
We
thank you.
appreciate your humility. We call her YouTube's favorite daughter. They're always happy to have Erica. Ruben Bosch says, "Thank you for taking my question. Here again for the curious. My question is evolution pseudoscience like critical race theory? Why or why not?" Sigh laughs. I like it. They asked everybody. They said if anybody wants to respond, all four can.
I'm going to pass on that one, honestly.
Yeah, my laughter was not sympathetic to the question.
Yeah.
Gotcha. John and Otangelo.
We can agree. I agree with Dr. Garte on many things. In this context, I will conduct a rarity and agree with Erica.
We'll find common ground one of these days, John.
Wow, nobody's taking a swipe. Let's see. Okay, well, fair enough. Next one. Sigifredo Sarabia says, Sy, you said that because we find something highly improbable doesn't mean that God did it. How can you not call it a miracle that you believe in to sway ID or divine design for the atheist scientist? I'm a little confused. Oh yeah, Sigifredo Sarabia always likes to throw us a curveball. Sy is actually not an atheist. Last time I checked. Are you still a theist? Okay, gotcha.
He knows that. I don't think that's what the question meant.
Oh, okay. I can read it again if it'd be helpful.
Yeah, there's some extra words there, so I don't know. Could you read it again? I didn't.
Sure. Yeah, they said, you've said that because we find something highly improbable doesn't mean that therefore God did it.
Right.
Thus, how can you not call it a miracle that you believe in intelligent design or divine design?
Oh, divine design. Okay, yeah. Well, oh boy. You know what? I suggest you read my book. It's all laid out there.
Well, absolutely.
It's too. I mean, that's a very complicated question. My own personal beliefs, and it's kind of outside of this topic, which is evolution. You know, but I do just, and it's a good question because, you know, it raises the question: how does a Christian who believes in God, who believes in miracles, you know, and I'm not alone. There are thousands of us. How do they deal with that with evolution? And, you know, it's a complicated answer. So that I guess I'm not either my book, or you could read Francis Collins or a number of other books by evolutionary creationists, which is what I am, that describe how that works.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. And all guests are linked in the descriptions, folks. So encourage you to check out the description box below. Kakarot says Standing for Truth is still claiming that genetic entropy is real. Okay, well, this is like this battle with Standing for Truth is spilled into the live chat. Sigifredo Sarabia, let's see, says, why is there an argument asking where the, quote, information came from, unquote, when they're giving you an answer? Rather than questioning, can you explain how the information got there, applying God in the process? Not true, that's 4.
Yeah, that's for the ID folks. They're asking for a model. That's
Okay.
actually what the question is. It's saying, how do you apply God to the model of the origin of information? How do you create something that can
Okay, so constructed at us. So let's think about this premise just for a second, conceptually. That would be like asking Dr. Garte how he or one of his peers came up with an idea to create something custom in their laboratory, and then be like saying, because I don't know exactly what the process was that they followed to execute this, it mustn't have been the result of an intelligent agent. And I'll toss it over to you, Sy, just for a second. So I know you are familiar with Dr. Tour. His nano car, it's 12 molecules.
Yeah.
It was 382 pages of processes they delineated to create this thing. If you, as a chemist, I know you're a biochemist, but as a professional chemist, if you looked at that would you ever come to the conclusion, if you didn't know who he was, you just came across this, you were looking at it into the appropriate technology, would you ever conclude that somehow that thing just created itself?
Yeah, that's a leading question. Of course not.
So I rest my case.
Yeah, I think the analogy is okay, but it doesn't answer Erica's question, which is, even if you don't know how Jim Tour was able to, get all these synthetic steps and try them out and make them work. And there's a little evolution in that too, by the way. I'm not a synthetic chemist as he is, and he's a genius at it, but I do know a little bit of chemistry. And it's not just having the good idea, it's trying it, seeing what doesn't work, modifying that, seeing something that does work, then going with that, which sounds very evolutionary in some ways. So I think what may be being asked, though, is not so much that, but let's assume there is an intelligent designer, okay, which I actually do. I mean, I believe in God. But even if I believe that God did it, meaning that God created everything, I still want to know how. And we have answers to that. We are getting answers to how God created, excuse me, for example, the world, stars, galaxies, things that I don't understand at all. But, there are answers there are models of creation. And I think I actually do agree with Erica that it behooves intelligent design. And as you may have figured out, I fall into the ID camp when we talk about abiogenesis. But my goal is to figure out not that God created life, but how did God create life? Because that's the scientific mission. Now, I don't know if it's going to succeed. It may not. It may be what you're saying is right, John, that we can't get that. We can't get there because it's understanding the mind of God is even harder than understanding the mind of Jim Tour. Okay, but we should try. And I think a lot of people.
I hate to do this. Forgive me. This question originally was addressed. Listen, no. This question was addressed to Otangelo, so I do want to not let Otangelo get left out.
Sorry about that.
No, it's not a problem. It's but given that we've heard from I think everybody else on this question, I want to at least because it was addressed to Otangelo, I want to give him a shot to say something. Said, why is there? So Otangelo, do you remember the question?
Yes, we don't know how God did it, but that doesn't mean that it is the best explanation. I mean, for example, if I want to I'm a machine designer. If I want to make a machine, then I sit to the drawing table, I draw it, the measures everything, it goes to the factory, and it is done. So we know that intelligence can actually instantiate things in the natural world. Now, how that interface actually works, how my mind can operate and influence my brain to give the order to my arm to move it and do things, we don't know that. We do not have a question in regards of that, but we know that it happens. So the point which Erica was making, but intelligent design doesn't have a model. Okay, but we know by experience that intelligence can instantiate and make blueprints and make machines and make factories and computers and transistors and turbines and energy plants and all these kind of things which we see in life, in the cell. So by experience, we know that it is possible, but we do not know that unguided random events can do the same. We do not have any evidence whatsoever that unguided random mechanisms can make blueprints and machines and factories.
Next up, Stupid Whore Energy strikes again. She says, for Team ID and in parentheses /Sy, if you've proven God is the intelligent designer or divine designer, can you explain why a perfect designer can make so many flawed things? Anybody?
I'm getting really annoyed with these standard talking points that we keep finding out that things that were claimed to be examples of bad design, we keep finding out that they actually had reasons behind them. And from an engineering perspective that solved all those problems. That just continues to keep happening. And I'll leave it at that if anyone wants to talk.
Thank you. Sounds good. Just to keep moving, because we do have a lot of questions. Thank you very much for your questions. Sigifredo Sarabia strikes again, this time saying, oh no, I'm so sorry. That last question was from Sigifredo Sarabia. This one is from Stupid Horror Energy. She asks, why would God use cytosine in the code, which has a predisposition to spark a mutation, results in some fairly radical substitutions in protein folds?
I think it's a great question. She always asks great questions that kind of point to the very haphazard nature of evolution.
Yeah, so the last time she asked that question, I responded. I actually looked it up. I forget exactly what it is now, but there's actually a benefit to it, and I forget what exactly it is. I'll have to find the paper again. But there's actually a whole paper on the actual benefit of that whole process in I'll have to find the paper again, but I actually addressed it. I was actually in a couple debates ago when she asked this question. I actually told her, because I read from the paper of why that was and the actual beneficial component of it. But
well, cytosine gets methylated, and methylcytosine is one of the major epigenetic marks, and we were talking about epigenetics earlier. So cytosine is not a bad nucleotide. The other thing about cytosine, as she probably knows, is that it's very labile. There's a lot of questions as how cytosine actually was able to be used in early life. But anyway, that's all I can say about that.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. And next up, this one comes in from, you guessed it, Erica's dad, Nephilim Free, says, Otangelo and learning her logical, plausible, probable. If I host an after show, will you guys come?
Yes, I will.
Oh,
yeah.
Snap. It's on.
Oh,
well, you guys, Erica and Sy, you guys should go crash that after show.
And
that would be...
I'm hosting my own, James. I'm sorry. Sy, you are invited if you'd like to come.
Thank you.
Well,
and Sy, I'm sure that Neff would love to have you on his channel as well.
Well, Nephilim and I have a difference in opinion as to who won the debate that we had. He recently claimed that he, quote, spanked me.
Oh man, I think we need to have round two tonight.
Aside from other connotations, I don't agree at all. Sorry, Neff.
Well,
I think I'll pass.
Very interesting. And then Alan Green, thank you.
I didn't know there was Sy Neff beef. That's it. Okay, that's interesting.
Oh, I thought we had a very cordial discussion, but he was bragging yesterday.
I can just hear him yeah, I spanked him. But thank you, Alan Green. Thank you for your questions. Says,
gotta be careful what you say about me, folks.
Oh my, Nephilim Free. Next, Alan Green says, Maddox, if Jesus came out today and said evolution is real, would you give him the same arguments on why he's wrong?
I'm not even going to respond to that dumbass.
Juicy.
Actually, I'm going to respond. So if Jesus performed miracles directly in front of you, would you accept that he is the Son of God and is divine, or would you continue to argue that you are hallucinating or that God is not real?
Thank you very much. Next up, appreciate your question. This one comes in from Slade Chimera. It says, for Christians, the Bible says God knit people together in the mother's womb. Why would that particular God need a code to tell it how to do the knitting?
Bad theology.
I don't even know how to respond to that. Again, this is what we're dealing with on YouTube. At least Erica, conversations with Erica we have, and obviously Dr. Garte as well, but on the atheist side, can at least have some semblance of high-level conversation. Stupid questions like that, I mean, how do you actually take yourself seriously in terms of, are you actually contemplating what it means to exist? If you're going to make comments about, oh, did God knit things together? I mean, good grief.
That's the closest thing I've ever gotten from a compliment from you, John. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Made my night. Highlighted the debate.
So much love. And lyingforjesus.org says, evolutionary science has, quote, consilience, which is multiple independent sources converging on a strong conclusion. biology, geology, paleontology, genetics, etc. What does intelligent design have?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's for me, but since no one jumped on it, I mean, yeah, that was the whole point of my intro, is that you've got multiple fields that are independent of one another that support an ancient Earth and evolutionary theory. And if you want to have a problem with abio, like I've got no real horse in that race. I like talking about it, kind of, and I'm happy to have a chat about it. But you know, again, I'm talking macroevolution and specifically human evolution. So yeah, that's my problem. ID doesn't make any of those predictions. And Otangelo says, you know, ID can say things, yeah, but that's not the same thing as a prediction that's set up in a paper and then analytically tested, like with like RStudio or something, where you actually have to run a real statistical analysis and see what the results are.
Otangelo or John, do you have a response? I'll give you a chance.
Right, Otangelo.
Well, I responded in the conversation, Erica, that I think that the gene-centric view is over. We know that in order to make complex organisms, it takes much, much more information that is commonly known. And science will progress to unravel more and deeper and layers of complexity and information. And that really points to design and not to unguided events.
Next, we must go to the next one. Situario Sarabia says, Erica, does evolution explain origins 100% or 99%?
I mean, you want to talk about the origins of all modern biodiversity? I would say 100%, because like Sy said, we're dealing with Luca, the last common ancestor of all life on Earth, which is a relatively complex cell. As far as once you get into the abiogenesis stuff, there's a lot of stuff we don't have figured out. I mean, I'll be the first one to say that. I don't think that means intelligent design, but that's where I come from. I find some of the stuff that's been put out compelling, and I think we'll find out more, or maybe we won't. But none of that changes the fact that everyone here is an ape, and that the Earth is very old, and that all life on Earth currently is related to one another by genetics, which is the only means by which we can tell heredity and gender relationships.
Gotcha. Thank you for your question. El Spagato says, is there any description of the mechanisms of, quote, creation, unquote, outside of the notion that, quote, cosmic sky daddy sang us into existence, unquote? I paraphrase, but that seems to be the main description of the process.
No, that's for you guys.
I don't think we can.
I mean, I'll address. I love the idiots that use the sky daddy stupidity. Yeah, so if I use G-code and create a program that can run a 3D printer and create something that's totally badass, am I a sky daddy, or am I a programmer and a designer and an engineer? Gotcha. Oh wait, that's literally what's happening in life. That's what's being expressed.
Thank you very much. And Sigifredo Sarabia strikes yet again, saying, Erica, if you see a rabbit, was it designed?
No.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then next, Samuel Lilleholm, thanks for your question, said, for evolutionary side, nature can code meaningful information, like the trochlea or eye muscle. Please explain how nature can code for independent parts with purpose systems like this.
I'm assuming that's for Sy and I.
Mm-hmm.
And he covered that extensively earlier in the conversation. Precursor mutations are something that we've seen in the lab. We know how these kinds of things set themselves up for success. And when we're dealing with macroscopic structures, like for instance, the eye, which is a favorite of creationists, you can not only, tinker around with that in a lab, but you can see the various stages of that in organisms currently. That gradient exists. Which is not something that we get for every single complex structure. You don't always get these nice intermediates, but when you look at, you can map out the complexity ranging from an eye spot to a complex camera eye, and something on the Earth has something within that transitions. And curiously enough, occasionally you can actually find these transitions in the fossil record, and eye spots appear before any complex eye. So, Sy, I'll toss it to you.
Well, I would just add to that the idea of convergence, which has become very prominent in evolutionary biology, and talking about eyes, I mean, we have the same kind of eye as octopus, which is not so far distant from us in relationship, but these structures seem to evolve over and over again in different lineages. So that points to the idea that there is some kind of law or laws of biology that we don't know yet that constrain what evolution can do in certain directions. And this comes from the work of Simon Conway Morris, who's you know a brilliant biologist, also happens to be a Christian, by the way. And I think that's you know it's a fascinating topic to go into. But too much for now.
Thank you very much. And Nephilim Free strikes yet again. He says, for Erica and Dr. Garte, how can material processes create non-physical information, algorithms, and semiotics, in parentheses, DNA? Unless it can, evolution is impossible. Explain why you believe it is possible.
Yeah, so I have my thoughts on that, or they just come from the literature. I mean, there's like pretty much, unfortunately, a trend that I've seen is that very frequently folks will throw out literature that scientists are scrambling, they can't figure out X is a big problem. You go to the literature, there's a proposed solution that's at least been tested with a methodology, and so I don't, if memory serves, the semiotic stuff and assigned meaning to things in the code, there's mystery to it, but this whole thing isn't like this stymie for the entirety of biology with regard to how it works and how different levels of it interact with one another. But Sy, you're the biochem guy. You know more about it than I do, for sure.
Well, I would just say to Nephilim Free, please pay attention, because I've said this to you many times. Origin of life, evolution does not describe the origin of life. We don't know the mechanisms for the origin of life. We do know the mechanisms for evolution. We know the biochemical mechanisms for evolution. They're very ornate, elaborate, beautiful, and they arose with the first living cell. But evolution is not abiogenesis. And by the way, no animal ever turns into another animal. Okay, ever. In fact, it's a really important part of evolutionary biology that cannot happen.
Law of monopoly.
So, you know, all of these mythical ideas about what evolution is, just, you know, please pay attention, drop them. That none of that applies to what evolution is.
Thank you very much. Next up, Jamie Russell says, Dr. Garte, where can or should we distinguish the appropriate place to draw the line for naturalism and our science as believers?
Okay, so that's a great question. Naturalism, if you define naturalism as everything can be explained through natural laws and processes without God, then you have a problem, because if you're a believer, you believe that God created the natural laws and processes. So that means that if you, in other words, I really get tired when an atheist said, we used to think that thunder was from the gods. Now we know it's, you know, what it really is. Yeah, that's true. And all the scientists who came up with the way the world works through natural laws were doing it as Christians to understand how God made things happen. And I just think, you know, we should extend that to life as well. So it's not nature or God. That's a dichotomy that's not true in my view. Scientists and the practice of science is restricted to looking at methodological naturalism. In other words, we can't use God when we do scientific experiments. We don't know how. It would be nice if we did, but we can't. So we don't. So when we looking at how things happen in the natural world, we have to only look at, quote, naturalism. So the papers I mentioned that I recently wrote, there's no mention of God in any of them. There never is in any scientific paper. But if you look between the lines, you might see him peeking out. Just a thought.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. And then next up, this one comes in from Zach Brannigan, who says, yes, but can we all agree that pineapple does go on pizza?
No.
Appreciate that.
That person should be arrested and
Yes.
I'm out on that too.
I don't want to hear about pineapple on pizza. That
Hawaiian pizza is one of the greatest.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Nasty guy. Okay, thanks for you. Otangelo, I have to hear. What do you think? Yes or no?
Oh no, I don't like it.
Wow. Oh, only John
We're
appeared.
completely switching, you know.
Yeah, there it is.
That's hilarious. Stupid Horror Energy strikes one more time, saying James is everyone's sky daddy, especially when he looks himself in the mirror after a hot shower. Okay, nasty. Such a nasty lady. Okay, thank you for that. What? The Maverick says... No. Silver. Well, we'll do the Maverick. So they say, how did single-celled organisms form huge organisms like dinosaurs?
That's an awesome question. Multicellularity is a question that's been tackled by a bunch of different folks. The most recent work came out last year and discussed how predation is a pressure in only, I think it was 2 out of the 5 lineages of clumping algae that they were looking at actually spurred multicellularity. So these organisms would group together, stay together, and it's not a colony, because when this organism reproduced, that second organism began reproducing these cells that again stayed clumped together. So it was the evolution of multicellularity, so to speak. So when once you get the proto-eukaryotic transition, which some have worked on, there's some interesting work on blue-green algae with existing bacteria that are endosymbiotic with the bacteria around them, and they have their own cell wall still, and it's all this weird stuff that I don't quite understand because the biochem scares me. But yeah, the once you reach multicellularity, really cool things start happening really fast. And if there's one thing that I think is really interesting when it comes to the history of life, it's that multicellularity only happened once, which is really interesting and really weird. And I think that, if you wanted to come at it from Sy's perspective, that would theoretically be a position where you could be like, maybe that's a directed process. I don't think, from my perspective, I don't think it's, impossible that it just did happen once, because it's very difficult to get multicellularity and indeed eukaryotes. Especially once we've got the statistics to back up common ancestry like we do. But once it, like I said earlier, once you reach LUCA, you've got a supercharged organism that can react and evolve to pretty much any environment, as we can see with the biodiversity that exists today.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
I hogged our time. I'm sorry, Sy.
No problem. We've got one last one we can go to. Silver Harlow. This is for you, Otangelo, in particular. They said in your opening, you said neurons need to be precisely placed. I have brain damage but recovered function. Does that not imply that neurons could be in different places?
Yes, that could be. I agree.
Gotcha. So short and sweet. Thank you very much.
I'm going to respond to that one too, because as y'all can see from my scar from here to here, I know a little something about brain stuff, and it's actually rather fascinating how our brains have the capacity for rewiring, but it requires extraordinary technology on the nano level in order for those processes to occur. And to me, when you really start to get into looking at what is being done in your brain and all facets of your body, from a technology perspective, not just chemical reactions and the bag of chemicals crap that we hear ad nauseum, in my opinion, puts things on a whole nother level of consideration. And anyway, gotcha. I think people very naively think that a lot of this stuff can just be explained when they have zero knowledge of what's actually happening on the molecular level to make life possible.
Gotcha. Now, want to say thanks so much, everybody. I have big news. Really excited. I just checked. The Kickstarter, which is for that debate that you're seeing at the bottom right of your screen, has just broken the halfway barrier. So really exciting, folks. Namely, the debate between Dr. Michael Shermer and Inspiring Philosophy. Believe me, we're determined it's going to happen. I'm going to be right back with a post-credit scene update in particular on that in just a moment. But do want to say thanks so much, folks. That Kickstarter is linked at the top. It's pinned at the top of the chat. And so really exciting news that we finally broke the halfway barrier. Also, want to let you know, folks, all of our guests Erica, Dr. Garte, John, and Otangelo are linked in the description. So if you want to hear more, well, hey, what are you waiting for? You can hear more. You can read more. And so click on those links from our guests in the description. Want to say thank you so much to all four, Erica, Dr. Sy, and John and Otangelo, for being here. It's been a true pleasure to have you with us tonight.
It was fun. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. To Otangelo and John, I would love to have a one-on-one conversation at some point if you'd like. I want to put that out there that I'm willing and able to have that here on Modern Day Debate at any time of your choosing. Sy, I think we agree on too much because to have any kind of a substantial debate, but I'd love to have a conversation with you if that's any consolation. I'm having an after show on my channel, so feel free to come drop by. I'm just gonna have a snack and hang out and talk to some folks in the chat room. And I think Nephilim Free is also having an after show, so go check that out too. That was my mod mode kicking in, James.
No problemo. So thank you all four of our guests. And last of all, thanks so much everybody for your questions, just for hanging out with us here at Modern Day Debate. We do hope you feel welcome no matter what walk of life you are from. We're a neutral platform hosting debates on science, religion, and politics, and we have many more juicy topics to come. So thanks so much, and as mentioned, I will be right back in just a few moments with updates on that Kickstarter. I don't care if we have to do a car wash in January. I will do that. T-Jump, Steven Steen, and I are going to suit up for a car wash to raise the remaining funds if we have to. We're going to make this one happen, you guys, so we will be right back. Thanks so much.
Hey, James, real quick before we wrap up, I want to thank Dr. Garte personally for coming on and having this conversation. And for those of you who have not read it, I strongly recommend his book, The Work of His Hands, A Scientist's Journey from Atheism to Faith. Although he and I disagree on evolutionary theory, we strongly agree on faith and God. And I strongly recommend reading his book. It's worthwhile to take the time.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for
you,
that.
John.
Absolutely. And all of these guests are linked in the description, folks. So check out those links. Thanks so much. And as mentioned, we'll be right back.